I think it should go without saying that Spider-Man PS4 was among the best exclusives for the PS4, right alongside Bloodborne, God of War, and Uncharted 4. Unlike the PS4 launch, which was just filled with cross-platform and third-party games, there wasn't anything really special, but Sony knew better this time around, and I present to you the highly anticipated Spider-Man Miles Morales. To start off with, this game looks great. The amount of detail that I saw in skin and cotton particles like those on beanies and mittens made me really appreciate the time Insomniac put into making this game look as good as it is. Seeing snow particles zip by as Miles swings from building to building was a really cool thing to see, and even though I played the entire game in performance mode, I still think it was a worthy sacrifice to get higher frame rates against ray tracing, but the choice is there, and I know that some people would probably prefer ray tracing over higher frame rates. The 3D audio placement was gobsmacking and made a certain boss fight where they used invisibility for a really unique experience. Another cool detail is that after any combat encounters, if damage was taken, you'll actually see this represented on Miles' suit, being more torn with the more damage taken. But on the topic of graphics and character models, I want to talk about the new Peter Parker model. I don't like it. And that's not me saying that the actor they switched to doesn't look like a Peter Parker, he definitely fits the bill, but am I really supposed to believe that this is a veteran Spider-Man who's been doing this for 8 years? Like, he looks like he could be going to school and in the same class with Miles. Regardless, leads at Insomniac did say that it took them time to get used to it, and there certainly wasn't enough time with him in this game to really develop a fair critique. However, those who played the original game's remaster, that's also on PS5, haven't been singing praise regarding this topic. Moving away from controversy, the meat of the game. And if you like swinging around in the first game, well, here's more of it, and it feels just as great to swing and move around as Miles as it was with Peter back in the original. But Miles possesses a few new moves in this game. I do miss the photo ops from the original, but obviously that wasn't going to be implemented into this game as Miles isn't a photographer like Peter. But to replace this, Miles is given music sampling side activities instead, which still do the trick. Holo challenges are a nice addition, but I didn't get too deep into these as I was totally burnt out platinum the original, but rest assured I will get back into it, and Insomniac have done a better job balancing the world activities. I wasn't overwhelmed, and I felt that there was an even amount of activities throughout the whole world. Now, my memory could be faulty here, but it's nice that the Triple J and the DannyCast podcasts still play while going through the menus, which I don't remember being a thing in the original. But this is only for the podcasts. Phone calls in the game still pause when you go into the menu, which makes no sense. Speaking of which, it was a nice change of pace to hear Danny alongside the classic J. Jonah Jameson podcasts, which gave a nice contrast. Now, one of the factors of getting this game on PS4 against PS5 would be the DualSense with its haptic feedbacks and adaptive triggers. So, how is it used in this version of the game? Well, I was a bit disappointed with the adaptive triggers, only really putting a bit of force when you push all the way down, and the haptic feedback just felt like standard rumble. I feel like they didn't go all out with the DualSense, which is fine enough, as I'd rather they make a good game than one with fancy vibrations and triggers that ends up being mediocre. So ultimately, in my opinion, getting the next gen version of this game only really nets you faster loading times and better graphics, but it's there. The story is great, definitely on par with the original. The characters functioned really well together and it felt very real. Genki is a lovable nerd who helps out Miles throughout the whole story, and I definitely felt their bromance while experiencing the game. I did feel that Rio Morales was missing a bit during the second act, but outside of that, I was completely sold on her character and was smiling with every piece of advice and interaction she had with Miles. Aaron was such an amazing and dynamic character, and I felt outside of Miles, really developed over time, but I'll get more into that in the spoiler section. Finn was also great, and just like Aaron, really developed within her own story arc. As you might know, this is a much smaller game, and if you stuck to just the main story missions and maybe a few side activities, you could definitely have this game done in one sitting, like 10 hours at most. You can definitely feel the game's length just by playing it. In the original, it felt like a lot more missions had smaller steps in the stories, along with the handful of missions that made huge leaps. In this game, which mind you only has about 16 main missions that range between 20 to 45 minutes, every single one felt like a major leap with no time to breathe. You can tell that just within a couple hours of playing this game that it will be a quick one. It does end up feeling a teensy bit rushed, but was still planned out well. My main complaint is that it could have had a few more main missions that had smaller developments to the story, but more than likely this will depend on how many Spider-Man app missions you take on. This is where I think they tucked away most of these main missions that only have small developments in the story, and this will definitely depend on what the player chooses to do. But me, who just went through all the main missions, felt like it was a bit rushed. When Aaron worked out Miles' identity, I couldn't believe it. It was only an hour in and somebody already knew, and it was handled very casually as well. But that doesn't matter because by the end of the game, a lot of people knew his identity. I thought this was Insomniac taking on a lot of risks, but in retrospect, this wasn't as big of a deal as I thought. I love what they did with Aaron / the Prowler in this game. He was just such a cool-ass character with depth. I hated him at times and loved him the next, and he was so dynamic. Out of all the characters, Aaron had the best development throughout the game. He was so easy to disagree with while also being completely understandable, and his boss fight is one of the best I've ever seen, and a key part of that was the interaction of 3D audio, where despite the camera locking on when he comes out of his camouflage, I could hear what direction he was in before the lock-on came. Now, despite my feelings for the story, that being that the story beats felt very tight with no time to rest, I still found it to be more than adequate for Miles' playable debut. He was fully realized and was well developed and became the Spider-Man of Harlem. Hell, before this game I knew nothing about Harlem, but its representation really made me feel like it was a place where culture and belonging are key, which also seems to be very important within Miles' own story. Finn ended up being more of a dualism, yin-yang sort of type to Miles, while Krieger Krieger actually reminded me of Pagan Min from Far Cry 4, where he was more of a looming threat to the point where I didn't really have many feelings or cared about him as much as Mr. Negative, who was a much more developed and deeper villain. Finn was given the exact same treatment and care as Miles, regardless that this is the type of character, you know, who goes bad because the main evil force killed someone close to them. This is nothing new, but the presentation along with the performances and the same top standard of writing made it all feel fresh. On the topic of the ending, the fucking game had me tearing up just like the original, with its sad but satisfying ending that left me feeling good. Last topic on the story is that I couldn't believe Insomniac pretty much used the exact same cliffhanger from the original. Pretty much they just confirmed that Harry Osborn will be the Green Goblin and that he will be playing a much bigger role in the sequel, with the end credit scene in this game being Norman Osborn telling his scientists to release him, which has definitely hyped up the sequel more so for me now. This is another excellent entry in the Insomniac Spider-Man series, and I'm now even more hyped up for the eventual sequel that I'm sure they're working on to this moment and putting all the care and consideration that they have set a standard for. Minor problems here and there, but never enough to take me out of the experience. Story even felt slightly rushed, but was still executed perfectly. Without a doubt, I'm giving Spider-Man Miles Morales a 9.6 out of 10. Play this game on either platform, it'll be a great time. The upgrades to PS5 don't warrant the PS4 version to be considered inferior. Just go, play it, right now. This is Naoto, and I will see you next time when I dive into sword slashing and dodge rolls in Demon Souls.